I was standing on a stage in Las Vegas, staring at a giant screen that showed a number I never thought I'd see in my lifetime. $127 million. That was the amount a private equity firm had just agreed to pay my company. People were clapping, cameras were flashing, my lawyer was grinning like he'd won the lottery himself. And me? I couldn't stop thinking about a beat-up pickup truck parked outside a gas station in Arizona 15 years earlier. Because that's where this whole crazy thing started. Back then, nobody was offering me millions. Hell, I was barely making enough to keep the lights on. I was 26 years old, working construction outside Phoenix, 6 days a week under the brutal desert sun, the kind of heat that makes your boots feel like they're melting into the pavement. Every morning started the same way, 4:30 a.m. Alarm, coffee, truck, job site, repeat. I wasn't chasing dreams. I was chasing paychecks. And honestly, I was losing. I had about $4,000 in credit card debt, an old truck that broke down every few months, and a tiny apartment that smelled vaguely like wet drywall. Most nights I'd come home exhausted, eat something cheap, and pass out in front of the TV. Nothing about my life screamed future millionaire, not even close. One July afternoon changed everything. The temperature had hit 116 degrees, no joke. The kind of weather where stepping outside feels like opening an oven. Our crew had been pouring concrete all day. Everybody was miserable. Around lunchtime, my foreman pointed at me. "Jake, go grab some ice." Best words I'd heard all day. I jumped into my truck and drove to the nearest gas station. When I got there, something weird caught my attention. There were people everywhere. Not buying gas, not buying snacks. They were standing in line for ice. A long line, like really long. Construction workers, landscapers, food truck owners, families hauling coolers. Everybody wanted ice. The gas station had one ice machine, and it couldn't keep up. I remember standing there, sweating through my shirt, while a guy in front of me started yelling at the cashier. "You guys are out again?" The cashier shrugged. "Truck comes tomorrow." The guy slammed his cooler shut. Unbelievable. Then he walked out, empty-handed. That should have been the end of it. Most people would have forgotten about it 5 minutes later. But something stuck with me. The next day, I noticed the same thing. Another line, another sold-out machine. A week later, same story. And once I started paying attention, I saw it everywhere. Arizona was basically one giant customer for ice. Every gas station sold it, every grocery store sold it, every convenience store sold it. And somehow, they were constantly running out. One afternoon, I asked a store manager about it. He laughed. "Dude, we could sell twice as much if we had it." That sentence hit me like a truck. We could sell twice as much. I couldn't stop thinking about it, at work, at home, while driving, while eating, everywhere. One night, I sat at my kitchen table with a calculator and a notepad. I started doing rough math. A bag of ice sold for around $2, sometimes $3. I had no clue what it cost to make, but water was cheap, electricity wasn't terrible. The numbers looked interesting, really interesting. For the first time in years, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Curiosity. Not excitement, not confidence, just curiosity. What if there was money in this? What if all those lines weren't random? What if everyone else was overlooking something hiding in plain sight? The problem was I knew absolutely nothing about the ice business. Nothing. I didn't know how machines worked. I didn't know suppliers. I didn't know distribution. I didn't even know how ice got into those giant freezers. But once the question got into my head, it wouldn't leave. And a few weeks later, I was about to make the dumbest financial decision of my life, or the smartest. At the time, I honestly couldn't tell the difference.
A few weeks after I started obsessing over ice, I did something that scared the hell out of me. I walked into my bank and asked for a loan. Now, you've got to understand something. I wasn't some entrepreneur with a business plan and a fancy pitch deck. I was a construction worker covered in dust half the time. The banker looked at me like I was crazy. Honestly, he wasn't wrong. "So you want to borrow money to buy An ice machine? Yeah. And you've never owned a business before? Nope. And how much money do you have saved? I told him. His eyebrows practically hit the ceiling. The meeting lasted maybe 15 minutes. I got rejected. Fast. I drove home feeling like an idiot, but instead of giving up, I got even more curious. Over the next month, every spare minute went into research. I'd finish a 10-hour shift, grab dinner, and spend half the night online. I learned something interesting. Most stores weren't actually making ice. They were buying it from distributors. The distributors made the ice, packed it into bags, loaded trucks, delivered it, stocked the freezers, and collected payments. That sounded like a massive headache. But then I stumbled across something I'd never seen before: an automated ice vending machine. Basically, a giant machine that made ice on site and sold it directly to customers. No cashier, no employee, no delivery trucks, just people pulling up with coolers and filling them up. The concept blew my mind. Crazier? Almost nobody had them in my area. The machine wasn't cheap, not even close. The model I wanted cost more money than I had ever spent on anything in my life. I remember staring at the price on my laptop. My stomach dropped. I closed the browser, opened it again, closed it again, opened it again. For 3 days I went back and forth. My brain kept saying, "This is stupid, this is risky, you don't know what you're doing," and all of that was true. But another thought kept showing up. What if it works? That question wouldn't leave me alone. Eventually, I called the company. The sales rep sounded way too cheerful. He walked me through everything: revenue estimates, maintenance, installation, customer traffic, the whole deal. Of course, he was trying to sell me something. I knew that. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that there might actually be an opportunity here. The problem was financing. Since the bank had already laughed me out of the building, I got creative. I emptied my savings, sold an old motorcycle, borrowed money from my uncle, picked up weekend side jobs, worked overtime whenever I could. For nearly a year, every dollar went toward one goal: buying that machine. Looking back, it sounds disciplined. At the time, it felt miserable. My friends were taking vacations, buying newer cars, going out every weekend. I was eating cheap meals and putting every spare cent into a dream I wasn't even sure would work. People thought I was nuts. One guy at work literally laughed when I told him what I was planning. "You're going to become the Ice King now?" The whole crew cracked up. I laughed too, but inside it stung, because deep down I was scared they might be right. Finally, after months of grinding, I had enough. Barely. I signed the paperwork, transferred the money, and suddenly I owned an ice vending machine. Just one. One machine, one shot. I found a small piece of land near a busy road outside Phoenix. Traffic was solid. Lots of contractors, lots of landscaping companies, lots of people hauling boats and coolers on weekends. It felt perfect. The installation took weeks. Every day after construction work, I'd drive over and check the progress. Watching that machine get assembled felt surreal, like I was building a second life. Then came opening day. I barely slept the night before. I kept imagining different scenarios. Maybe nobody would show up. Maybe the machine would break. Maybe I'd just blown every dollar I had. The next morning, before sunrise, I parked across the street with a coffee in my hand, just waiting, watching, nervous as hell. The first hour? Nothing. Not a single customer. My stomach started sinking. The second hour? Still nothing. Now I was sweating, and it wasn't because of the Arizona heat. I kept checking the machine, checking my phone, checking the machine again. Then, around 9:17 a.m., a white pickup truck pulled into the lot. A contractor stepped out carrying a cooler. He looked at the machine for a second, read the instructions, inserted a few dollars. The machine started humming. A few moments later, ice poured into his cooler. The guy smiled, closed the lid, got back into his truck, and drove away. That was it. One sale. Probably less than $5, but I swear to you, it felt like I'd just made $1 million, because for the first time in my life, money had come in while I wasn't swinging a hammer, and I had no idea
that that little machine was about to teach me a lesson that would completely change the direction of my life.
For the first few weeks, I was basically addicted to checking that machine. Every morning before work, every lunch break, every evening after work, I'd drive by just to see what was happening. At first, the numbers were okay, nothing spectacular. A few customers here, a few customers there. Definitely not enough to quit my job. Definitely not enough to impress anybody. But then something interesting started happening. People came back. The same trucks, the same landscaping crews, the same contractors, again and again. One guy showed up so often I started recognizing his truck from a mile away, every Tuesday, every Thursday, every Saturday, like clockwork. One afternoon, I finally introduced myself. "Hey man, appreciate the business." He looked confused. "You own this thing?" "Yeah." He laughed. "Best ice in town." I thought he was joking. Turns out he wasn't. He explained that my machine was cheaper than the gas station and he could buy way more at once. Then he said something that stuck with me. "Plus, it's always here." Always here. That was the whole advantage. No waiting, no sold-out freezers, no employees, no hassle. Just ice. Fast, simple, reliable. As the weather got hotter, sales started climbing. Then climbing some more, then climbing even more. Every week seemed better than the last. I remember logging into the machine's dashboard one night and staring at the numbers. I refreshed the page 3 times because I thought it was wrong. The machine had made more money that month than I had earned working construction. Not profit, revenue, but still, I couldn't believe it. For years, I'd traded time for money. Every dollar required sweat, hours, labor. Now, this metal box was sitting on a patch of dirt making money while I slept. The idea felt almost illegal. Of course, life has a way of humbling you when things start going well, and mine came on a Saturday afternoon. The machine stopped working. Completely. No warning, no error message, nothing. I got a notification on my phone while I was eating lunch. Machine offline. At first, I figured it was some minor glitch. Then another notification came. Then another, customers requesting refunds. I jumped into my truck and sped across town. When I arrived, there were 3 angry customers standing around the machine. One guy looked ready to kick it. Another had already called the number on the side. My number. For the next 6 hours, I stood in 112-degree heat trying to figure out what had happened. Turns out a critical component had failed. The machine couldn't make ice, couldn't dispense ice, couldn't do anything. It was just a giant, expensive paperweight. I called the manufacturer. No replacement part available until Monday. Monday! It was Saturday, in Arizona, in the middle of summer. I wanted to throw up. Every hour the machine sat dead, I was losing money. Not just sales, customers, trust, momentum, everything. That weekend felt longer than an entire year. By Monday morning, I was exhausted. The repair finally got completed late that afternoon. The machine came back online, and I thought the nightmare was over. It wasn't, because when I checked the next month's numbers, something terrifying happened. Sales dropped. Hard, way harder than I expected. The breakdown had driven people elsewhere, and some never came back. That was the first time I learned a lesson every business owner eventually learns. Customers don't owe you loyalty. If you aren't available, they'll find someone who is. Simple as that. For a couple months, I worried I'd made a huge mistake. Maybe the machine had peaked. Maybe I got lucky. Maybe this whole thing was a fluke. Then, one evening, while reviewing sales reports, I noticed something strange. Despite the setback, the machine was still generating cash, consistent cash, month after month. Not life-changing money, but real money. The kind of money that could be reinvested, the kind of money that could grow. That's when a dangerous idea entered my head, an idea that kept me awake most of the night. Because if one machine could do this, what would happen if I had 2 or 5 or 10? The thought sounded ridiculous. I still worked construction. I still had debt. I still wasn't some hotshot entrepreneur.
But the numbers didn't care about my insecurities. The numbers were telling a story, and that story said one machine wasn't enough. So a few days later, I made a decision that would either multiply everything I'd built or completely destroy it.
The decision was simple, at least on paper: buy a second machine. The problem? I didn't have the money, not even close. The first machine had taken me nearly a year of scraping together cash, working overtime, and living like a broke college student. Now, I wanted another one, a bigger one, and I wanted it fast. Most people would have waited, played it safe, built up savings. Not me. I got greedy. Not in a bad way, at least that's what I told myself. I wasn't dreaming about Ferraris or private jets. I was obsessed with momentum. The first machine had proven something. People wanted ice. A lot of it. And every month I waited felt like leaving money on the table. So I started pitching banks again. This time, the conversation was different. I walked in with numbers, real numbers, revenue reports, customer data, maintenance costs, profit margins, stuff I didn't even know existed a year earlier. The banker who had rejected me before looked at me like I was a completely different person. And honestly, I felt like one. A week later, I got approved. Not for everything I wanted, but enough. I walked out of that bank feeling 10 feet tall, then immediately felt sick, because now I had debt. A lot more debt. And debt is fun when you're signing the paperwork. It's a lot less fun when you're lying awake at 2 a.m. wondering if you're about to ruin your life. Still, I moved forward. The second machine went into a town about an hour outside Phoenix. Smaller population, less competition, lots of construction and agriculture. The location looked promising. I was excited. Until opening month. The numbers sucked. No other way to say it. They sucked. The machine wasn't losing money, but it definitely wasn't winning either. Meanwhile, I had loan payments showing up every month like clockwork. I started questioning everything. Maybe I'd picked the wrong location. Maybe I'd expanded too soon. Maybe the first machine had just gotten lucky. For the first time since starting this journey, I felt real fear. Not the kind that disappears after a good night's sleep, the kind that sits in your stomach all day, the kind that follows you everywhere, at work, at home, in the shower, everywhere. Then, one afternoon, while I was stressing over spreadsheets, my phone rang. It was the owner of a landscaping company, one of my regular customers. "We love your machine." "I appreciate it." "Nah, seriously, we use it every day." "Glad to hear it." Then he asked a question that changed everything. "Can you put one closer to our yard?" I laughed. "Man, I can barely afford the ones I already have." He laughed too. But after the call ended, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Because he wasn't asking for a discount. He wasn't complaining. He wanted more locations. And he wasn't the only one. Over the next few months, I started hearing similar comments. Contractors, food truck owners, sports leagues, event organizers. Everybody wanted convenience. Nobody cared about ice. That's what I finally realized. I wasn't selling frozen water. I was selling convenience. That shift in thinking changed everything. Instead of asking, where can I put an ice machine? I started asking, where are people already desperate for convenience? Gas stations, boat ramps, campgrounds, sports complexes, industrial parks. Suddenly, opportunities started appearing everywhere. Places I would have ignored before became obvious. Places with traffic, places with demand, places where people hated driving 20 extra minutes just to find ice. By the time my second machine finally started performing, I already had plans for a third, then a fourth, then a fifth. But that's when I ran into a problem nobody had warned me about. The machines weren't the hard part anymore. People were. Because the moment I started growing beyond a one-man operation, things got messy, really messy. And one employee was about to teach me a very expensive lesson.
Up until that point, everything had been on me. If a machine broke, I fixed it. If a customer called, I answered. If a location needed cleaning, I grabbed a broom and handled it myself. It wasn't glamorous, but it worked. The problem was, by the time I got my fifth machine running, I was losing my mind. I was still working construction during the day, running the ice business before work, running it after work, running it on weekends, running it during lunch breaks. There were days I felt like I had 2 full-time jobs and neither one was letting me sleep. Something had to give. So I hired my first employee. His name was Mike. Good guy. At least that's what I thought.
He was around my age, hardworking, easy to talk to, and seemed eager to learn. I remember feeling relieved. Finally, help. For the first time in years, I wasn't carrying everything alone. At first, things went great. Mike handled maintenance calls, checked machines, restocked supplies, cleaned locations. Customers liked him. I liked him. The business kept growing. Then, little things started happening. Nothing major, at least not at first. A repair bill looked higher than expected. A supply invoice seemed strange. A fuel expense didn't make sense. Small stuff, easy to ignore. And that's exactly what I did, because I was busy. Busy people miss things. That's one of the most expensive lessons I've ever learned. One evening, I was reviewing expenses when I noticed a receipt that seemed off. Then another, then another. The numbers weren't huge, a couple $100 here, a few hundred there, but something felt weird. So I started digging. The deeper I looked, the worse it got. It turned out Mike had been submitting fake expenses for months. Nothing flashy, nothing dramatic, just enough that he thought nobody would notice. A few $100s at a time, over and over. I remember sitting in my office staring at the screen. My chest felt tight. I wasn't even angry at first. I was disappointed. This was a guy I trusted, a guy I'd given an opportunity, a guy I'd considered a friend. The next morning, I confronted him. The conversation lasted less than 10 minutes. He denied everything, then admitted some of it, then blamed stress, then blamed money problems, then blamed me. By the end of the conversation, it was clear there was no fixing it. I fired him, and as he walked out, I felt something I hadn't expected. Fear. Because now I had a bigger problem. The company was growing, fast, and I realized something terrifying. The systems in my business were garbage. Everything depended on trust, verbal agreements, spreadsheets, text messages, memory, basically chaos. That might work when you have one machine, maybe even 5, but not 10, not 20, not 50. So instead of immediately hiring another employee, I spent months building systems, tracking software, camera monitoring, maintenance schedules, financial controls, checklists, procedures, boring stuff, the kind of stuff nobody talks about in success stories. Everybody wants to hear about the million-dollar deals. Nobody wants to hear about spreadsheets. But those boring systems changed everything, because once they were in place, growth got easier, way easier. The business started running smoother than ever before. Machine number 6, number 7, number 8, then something happened that completely changed the trajectory of the company. One of my locations went viral, and it happened by complete accident. A random customer posted a video online showing our machine filling an entire cooler in under a minute. Nothing special. At least I didn't think so. But apparently thousands of people did. The video exploded. Then another creator made a video, then another. Within weeks, local news stations were talking about us. People started driving across town just to use the machines. I couldn't believe it. For the first time, the business wasn't chasing customers. Customers were finding us. And the attention attracted someone I never expected, an investor, the kind of investor who showed up wearing a watch worth more than my first truck. And the offer he put on the table would force me to make the biggest decision of my life.
The first time I met the investor, I almost didn't go. Seriously, I figured it was a waste of time. By then, I'd gotten plenty of weird emails from people claiming they wanted to partner or scale the business. Most of them were full of hot air. So when his assistant reached out, I nearly ignored it. But something felt different. The guy had actually done his homework. He knew our locations. He knew our numbers. He even knew which machines were performing best. That got my attention. So a week later, I found myself sitting across from him in a conference room in Scottsdale. I showed up wearing the nicest shirt I owned. He showed up looking like he walked out of a Fortune 500 board meeting. For a second, I felt completely out of place. Then he asked a question. How many machines can this business support? I started talking about 10, maybe 15, maybe 20 if everything went perfectly. He smiled. Then he shook his head. No. I frowned. What do you mean, no? He leaned back in his chair. I'm talking about hundreds. Hundreds. The word hit me like a punch, because up until that moment, I'd been thinking like a guy who used to pour concrete for a living,
I was focused on the next machine, the next location, the next month. This guy was looking 10 years ahead. He saw something bigger, way bigger. Over the next few weeks, we had several meetings. He showed me projections, market studies, expansion plans, states I'd never even considered entering. The numbers were insane. Part of me thought he was crazy. The other part wondered if I'd been playing too small. Then he made his offer. He wanted to invest millions into the company. In exchange, he'd get a chunk of ownership. Not control, not a majority stake, but enough to matter. For days, I couldn't think about anything else. I made pros and cons lists, talked to accountants, talked to lawyers, talked to my uncle, the same guy who'd loaned me money when nobody else believed in me. Everybody had an opinion. Some said, take the deal. Others said, keep everything for myself. The truth was, I was scared, not because of the money, because of what the money would mean. Growth, real growth, the kind that creates opportunities, but also creates risk. Eventually, I signed, and overnight, everything changed. The pace became insane. We started opening locations faster than I ever thought possible. Arizona became Nevada, Nevada became Texas, Texas became New Mexico, then Florida, then more. Every few months, it felt like the company doubled in size. I quit construction, finally. The day I walked off that job site was one of the weirdest days of my life. I thought I'd feel victorious. Instead, I mostly felt grateful. That job paid my bills when I had nothing. It carried me through the years when this whole thing was just an idea. As I drove away, I remember looking in the rearview mirror and thinking, man, I really did it. Or at least I thought I did. Because success creates new problems, and the bigger you get, the bigger the problems become. We had equipment failures, supply shortages, permitting nightmares. Competitors started copying our model. Some locations failed completely. One expansion cost us nearly $1 million. Gone, just like that. A few years earlier, losing $1,000 would have ruined my month. Now I was signing paperwork with losses that made my stomach turn. There were nights I couldn't sleep, nights I wondered if we'd grown too fast, nights I questioned every decision I'd made. But every time we got knocked down, we kept moving, and eventually the business reached a size I never would have believed possible. More than 100 locations, millions of customers, millions in annual profit. The company had become something far bigger than me. That's when the phone calls started. Not from investors, from buyers, big buyers, the kind with private jets, investment funds, and teams of analysts. And one of those calls would eventually lead to the moment I told you about at the beginning of this story. The day a number appeared on a giant screen in Las Vegas, a number that would change my life forever.
A few years after that first investor came on board, I got a call that didn't seem real. At first, I thought it was a joke. The guy on the other end introduced himself and named a private equity firm I'd actually heard of. Not some small investment group, a major player. The kind that buys entire companies for amounts of money normal people can't even imagine. He got straight to the point. We've been watching your company. Those 5 words made my heart start racing, because when people with that kind of money are watching you, they're usually not calling to say hello. Over the next few months, their team dug into everything, and I mean everything. Financial records, contracts, locations, equipment, employees, growth projections, customer data, every detail of the business I'd spent over a decade building. Some days it felt less like a business deal and more like an FBI investigation. The process was exhausting. Every time I thought we were close to the finish line, another request would show up, another meeting, another report, another round of negotiations. And the craziest part? I still wasn't sure I wanted to sell. That sounds insane, right? Most people imagine that if someone offers you life-changing money, you immediately say yes. But it wasn't that simple. This wasn't just a company. This was my life, my identity, my story. I remembered every step, the construction sites, the debt, the sleepless nights, the broken machine during that brutal Arizona summer, the first customer, the first employee, the first profitable month, every single piece of it. Selling felt a little like giving away part of myself. For weeks, I wrestled with the decision. Then one night, I drove to the location where everything had started, the original machine, the one that changed my life. It was late, almost midnight. The desert air had finally cooled down. I parked nearby and just sat there, watching customers come and go. A contractor, a family filling coolers, a guy loading up before a fishing trip. The same kinds of people I'd seen all those years ago. And that's when it hit me. The business didn't belong to the version of me who started it anymore. It had grown beyond that, beyond one machine, beyond one town, beyond one guy trying to escape a construction paycheck. The company was going to keep growing whether I owned 100% of it or not. The next morning, I called my lawyer. Let's do it. The deal closed months later, and suddenly I was standing on that stage in Las Vegas, the same stage I told you about at the beginning, watching a giant screen display a number that would have sounded completely impossible to the younger version of me, $127 million. People always ask what it felt like. Honestly, not what you'd expect. There wasn't some magical moment where fireworks went off in my head. There wasn't a movie scene, no dramatic music, no sudden feeling that I'd finally made it. Mostly, I felt grateful. Grateful that I hadn't ignored my curiosity, because that's really where all of this started. Not with money, not with business, not with ambition. Curiosity. A simple question. Why are all these people standing in line for ice? That's it. One question. One observation, one tiny moment most people would have forgotten by the next day. I almost forgot it myself. And that's probably the biggest lesson I've learned through this entire journey. Opportunities rarely show up looking like opportunities. Most of the time, they look ordinary, boring even. A long line at a gas station, a problem everybody complains about, something hiding in plain sight. Most people walk right past it. I almost did too. These days, my life looks very different. I don't wake up at 4:30 a.m. to pour concrete anymore. I spend more time with my family. I travel when I want. I invest in businesses. I mentor entrepreneurs. And every now and then, when I'm driving through Arizona, I'll stop at one of our old locations. I'll watch customers filling coolers and loading bags of ice into their trucks. Nobody recognizes me. Nobody knows the story. To them, it's just an ice machine. But every time I see one, I smile, because I remember the broke construction worker who was sweating through his shirt in 116-degree heat, standing in line at a gas station, completely unaware that the thing that would make him rich was sitting right in front of him the whole time. And honestly, that's still my favorite part of the story.
Before you go, hit that like button and subscribe for more unbelievable stories just like this one. See you in the next story.